welcome back. Today we're going to be finishing our scarf. We're going to twist the fringe first, and then we're going to do a process called wet finishing, which is basically washing it and agitating it a little bit so that the fibers will become more connected and more cohesive piece of fabric. If you haven't done so already, I appreciate it if you would subscribe. I'm going to be making many videos about weaving. Our next project, I think we're going to start on doing a towel, and I'll show you from choosing the pattern to putting it on the loom once again. This time, instead of warping from front to back, we're going to do a back to front, just to show you what the difference is and the different tools that you may need to do it with. Again, thank you for joining us, and we'll get started with twisting the fringe. I'm almost finished weaving this warp, and I have not broken any warp threads, but I did want to show you what you have to do to fix a warp thread. Usually warp threads break on the edges or the selvage of the cloth. That's where, with the draw in, with your shuttle coming back and forth, and if you are pulling on the warp threads as you're trying to set your angle for beading the weft in, it causes wear on especially these edges of the cloth. So often one of these warp threads will break. So I'm going to just cut it. Actually, let me cut the one that's in the heddle. This is our floating selvage. If that one breaks, it's very easy to repair it because there's usually a little bit extra yarn in the back of the loom that you can pull forward and repair it here. But I want to show you on a more difficult part. So I'm coming in one, and I'm going to cut that. So you would end up with a loose thread here. Often, because it's under tension, when it breaks, it will pop back, and you may not notice it until you've woven a little bit further. Sometimes you won't find this end until it's out of the heddles and actually winding around the back of the warp and back of the heddles. So to repair it, you need extra yarn, the same that you had for your warp, and you need to rethread it through the heddle, tie it on here, and tie it onto the other end. So let me get the warp yarn. I'm usually fairly generous when I put on the yarn for repair. I use a little more than I need to, but that helps to separate where the problem is. Most likely, if it's worn here, it's been worn through to the heddle. So even though it broke here, it's probably worn through for a good foot and a half or so. So I'm going to give myself maybe 2 feet of yarn. And in the front here, I'm going to tie it onto the broken end. Later, we're going to come through and I'm going to pull this knot out. When you're weaving, you do not want to knot anything. It will really show in your finished project. But in order to attach this here, I need to do this. Then I take a pin and place it in the cloth, fairly close to where the break is. And then I'm going to take this and wind it around the pin in a figure 8 configuration. So up and around, up and around. And then I'm going to bring the warp yarn forward. Once that's done is putting the knot at a point that I can cut it out of the finished fabric. It won't be woven in. Then I need the threading hook to come through the reed. I can see exactly where I took it out. There's a space there. So I'm going to pull that back. And then I need to find the heddle that this particular line was going through. And the heddle is on shaft number 1. It's empty right now. And I'm going to try there. I'm raising the shaft so it's a little easier for me to reach. And I need to put my hook through the back because we're pulling this warp from front to back. I Pull that through, and then we'll go to the back of the loom to continue tying it on. In the back here, I am finding, this is my new warp thread, and then I find the loose end that's hanging at the loom here. We're right here at the apron rod. Since that's available, I'm going to just tie it right to the apron rod. If you were in the middle of weaving, then you would want to tie this off, same as I did to the front. And because you can't tie it as tightly as it was before, you may need to hang a weight on this line, the same as we did for the floating salvage. I'm trying to get the tension similar to the other warp threads, and just a simple knot here so that it's secured to the apron rod. I've just run out of yarn, and we're about precisely where I need it to be for the left yarn. And this is at 66 inches here, so 67, about 68 inches on the loom. And if we go to the back of the loom, let me show you the apron rod and where that is. You can see the apron rod is almost ready to go right into those heddles. When you get close to the apron rod in the back, it starts to become hard to treadle the loom. I'm going to let off the brake a little bit and bring it forward. I could have probably woven about another 4 or 5 inches, but at that point, it gets difficult to lift the harnesses and treadle for the pattern that you need. Your shed starts to become smaller, and you can't get the shuttle through. Usually, you weave until you've woven to the length that you want your scarf to be. If I had additional yarn on the warp beyond that, then I would take an opportunity to just sample a few things, to maybe change the tie-up to a different tie-up and try a different pattern while I had this on the loom. It's a good time just to see what happens and experiment. Depending on the length that's left, this one would be so short, there's really not enough to make anything substantial. And this is why we left loom waist. Every loom is different. As I said, I could probably weave on this a little bit further. We also need to have some warp left over for our fringe. So maybe I could weave here, and that leaves me about 12 to 18 inches of loom waist. To take our project off the loom, we're simply going to cut it off. I want to make sure we have enough extra to make our fringe. So that's 8 inches here, and I'm going to pull this forward. So now I know if I cut this anywhere behind the heddles, I'm good. I want to leave extra. So I'm going to cut it right about where the heddles are. I have taken the tension off of the warp, so it's not pulling against it right now. It's still got a little bit, but not too bad. And I'm going to just cut straight across here. Bring this forward, pull it through the reed. Now I need to get it off of the cloth beam, and to do that there is a paw here that I'm just going to push back, and then I need to hold it up, it's coming down. Then you just pull it right off. I'm going to drop it down and move the beater back, and then pull the apron rod up to the breast beam. What I've done is brought the apron rod up to the breast beam, and I am now untying the knots from the apron rod. When I beamed this, I was concerned that I would not have enough warp to do the entire length of the project that we had. when I tied it on, I knew that I could untie this, save what would normally be waste by cutting it off. If I untie the knots, I can use all of this yarn for the fringes. If you're working with an expensive fiber like silk or alpaca, you may want to do this. Usually with a wool warp like this, I would just cut it off, but as I said, I was concerned about the length of the warp. So for a few minutes of untying, it's worth my time to save it. We're going to learn how to twist the fringe and repair any issues we may have in the fabric before we do a wet finishing. We finished weaving the scarf, and now it's time to twist the fringe or decide what kind of finishing we want to do on the two ends to secure the warp threads. This is the scrap yarn that we put in to begin the weaving, to spread the warp out so that it's nice and even when we actually start it. And this is the other end. We didn't need to put any scrap in there. So now what we need to do is to secure the weft from pulling out. To do that, there's really two ways you can do it. One is to make a fringe and twist it, and that will hold the weft from fraying out. The other thing, which is generally used with something like kitchen towels, tea towels, and placemats, that kind of thing where you don't want a fringe, is to actually make a hem where you would fold it over twice and sew it. But because this is a scarf, the fringe adds a decorative element to the end of it. The first question is, how long should your fringe be? And that really is a matter of choice. To me, it depends on what the use of the scarf is. If it's going to be a scarf for a man and more of an outdoor use scarf, I prefer the fringe to be a little bit shorter. If it was to be a more decorative type of scarf, then I like a nice long fringe. Sometimes I'll put beads in it or do other decorative finishes to the fringe while I'm twisting it. So the first thing we're going to need to do is to remove the scrap yarn from the fringe itself. The easiest way to do that is to separate it. You want to make sure you're not cutting any of the warp and just cut it. So I'm going to move it out and be careful. It's a little bit tighter as we get up here near the actual finish part. And that's why I like to use a scrap yarn that is different from the weft yarn or warp yarn, so you can really pull it apart and see it. Since this is wool, it kind of is sticking to the yarns that are here. If you're using something that is more slippery, it's easier to pull this out. If it's a wider scarf, you may want to cut this a couple times so that you can pull it out again more easily, but this one isn't so bad. Because this is a wool, it will stay without unraveling pretty easily. If you're using, again, a more slippery type of fabric like tencel or silk, then you would want to possibly leave this in until you've twisted some of it and work your way across, because as you remove this, it will start to work its way out. So I'm going to take another clip here just so I'm not pulling. Wool has tiny barbs all along the thread that like to stick together. They almost work like Velcro. And it's not really necessary for you to twist a fringe on a wool item. It will hold after you do your finishing, the wet finishing. It sort of felts a little bit, or a term called fulling, and it will hold even without twisting the fringe. But I think the fringe looks really pretty when you put a nice twist in it, so I prefer to use that as a decorative element in the scarf. So again, we'll remove all this scrap yarn. Then the next thing was deciding how long we want the fringe to be. Because this is a heavier weight scarf, I prefer the fringe to be a little bit shorter. And by short, I'm thinking probably a 4-inch, maybe 5-inch. That's why we left extra. There is about 7.5 inches of fringe. This side's a little bit shorter than the other side. And that gives us plenty of room to twist the fringe. You want to leave enough extra fringe so that you can tie the knot comfortably. Also, when you're twisting the fringe, it has some take up there. So always leave your fringes a few inches longer than you want the finished product to be. About a 5-inch fringe I think is going to look nice. And I say about because when we start twisting, after the first couple twists, I'm just going to make sure it's even. I'm not going to worry about being precise on the measurement of the fringe. So that gives us, at a 5-inch fringe, that still gives us enough to tie with and enough take up for the fringe. Now I want to show you, this side actually is good as far as the length of the fringe to work with. I don't want to cut it shorter because it may end up being too short. And I always start with the side that has the shorter fringe because that's going to decide on the length of this. If you use your long pieces and you decide you want a 5-inch fringe and you twist it all and it comes out great, and you come over here and you start twisting for 5-inch fringe, you may find that it's just too short to get the knot in the bottom of it. So I always start with the shortest one, and that determines the length for the longer one. If these are just way too long to try and twist the way they are. So the first thing that I would do on this side is to trim it. And don't worry about these pieces here. These are where we had joins or broken warp threads. There's a few places where there are some threads sticking out. We're going to take care of them, like here, after we finish the scarf, after wet finishing. Then I'll go through and trim all those off. This is a rotary mat, and I have a rotary cutter here. I also have a rotary ruler, edge ruler. You don't have to have these things, but it does make things a little easier. First, I want to line it up straight along one of the edges here. And then I'm just going to pull the fringe straight here. Put my ruler down, and I want 8 inches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that brings it to right here. Bring my lip up against here. Then with my rotary cutter, I'm going to just cut off the excess here. And it's not going to be perfect. Those ends are not laying exact. But this is just to get rid of some of the excess so that I can twist it. When we're finished twisting, then I like to do a nice cut at the bottom again. Always secure your rotary blade so you don't end up cutting yourself, and get things out of the way. What I have is a foam core board. It has foam in between two harder pieces. And I've marked off 1-inch increments so that I can twist my fringe and keep everything even. I'll take this and pin it to the board. I like to use a nice long pin, and we want 5 inches of fringe when we're finished. So I'll count up 5 blocks. 1, 3, 4, 5 is right here where my numbers are. And that's where I'm going to pin the scarf. And I like to keep it right on that line so everything stays even when I'm finished. Won't be crooked. And a couple pins across just so as you're pulling on it, it won't get out of line. And lay it nice and straight. You want to just get your fringes a little bit straighter. I'm working here on my kitchen table. If you have a table where you could put a C-clamp on each side to hold this board down, it's a lot easier. Or what I have is just a container with some weight in it, a couple cans, just to weight everything down. So as I'm pulling against the fringe, it won't move everything. To twist the fringe, again, you have to decide how thick you want the fringe. I like it a little bit thicker on a wool scarf than I would on a decorative scarf. And usually I use 6 yarns total. So I am counting out 6 here. So I'm putting 3 in each hand. To do this, you want to twist the fringe one direction. It doesn't matter which direction, but you're going to twist both of these ends in one direction. And you want to twist it to the point where it starts to take up on itself to twist. So I am twisting these to the right, and you need to count how many twists you do so that you keep it even all along the scarf. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they both come up on themselves pretty well. The next thing we're going to do is twist both of these together. Don't let go of the twist that you have. Put them both together and twist the opposite direction. Again, counting how many times you're twisting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. That is a really good twist. Again, it twists up on itself, and that's good. And then I want to make a knot so that it lands right here. That will give me my 5 inches. I just do an overhand knot. Before I pull it really tight, I want to bring it to the board and move the knot exactly where I want it. So I'm holding it stretched out right here on the board, and I'm going to tie it. Then I'm going to just let it go, and it twists itself back. Do this one more time for you. So I want 6 threads total. Going to do 3 in each hand. First I'm going to twist to my right 10 times on each of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Both of them have enough twist to them, and now I'm going to show you another way to do this. I take this, hold it down, and tie a knot. Again, loosely at first so that I can pull it back to where I want. Going to let go of it, and it twists itself up. I don't need to twist it back the other way. So that is another way you can do it. Pull it to the end here where they're even and tighten it down. So this is again something that's nice, relaxing to do. I usually take my board with a TV tray and sit in front of the TV and work on this at night. Now, to make things go quicker, there is a tool. This is made by Leclerc, and it has alligator clips on the end. We can do 2 fringes at one time with this, and what we do is just move this around. It'll twist. So to do that, I'm going to count out my fringes once more. 3 and 3. How many times you twist it is really up to you. If you want a looser fringe, you can do that. Tighter, do that. The only thing I would say is try to keep everything uniform as you're doing it. So we take this and just clip it here. They make this with several different number of alligator clips. You can get one that's just for making one fringe at a time. This one makes 2 at a time. I'm not sure how many they go up to, but I know there's one that's even larger than this. And then again, 3 here and 3 again. Okay, keeping it consistent, I'm going to do 10 twists. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I look to see that's a good twist for me. Now I take the 2 fringes off and I'm going to put them together like I did before, tying it, trying to keep it even with the bottom of the board so that I know I have the 5 inches of fringe. Let it go. That didn't twist up enough for me. It's not as tight as the other one, so I'm going to take this out and I want to twist it up a little bit more than that. 10 just wasn't as much as I was doing with my hand. So let's add another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think that should do it. So that's a total of 16 twists now. Take that off. This is pulling a little bit more than I want here, so I'm going to move my pin right between the fringes that I'm working on. Again, overhand knot. Measure it a little bit longer than the bottom of the board and let it twist itself back. Then I'll take these and look, they're nice and even, so I'll tighten down my knot. And there you have it. So you continue that all the way across to the very end. When you get to this end, you may find that you have more than 6 yarns left. And I usually, when I'm a couple inches from the end, I'll take a look at how many I'm going to have left over. And I try to add an extra one in one of the bouts in here, maybe one here, so that the ending actually has a couple that have 6 in them. So I'm going to continue doing this and I'll show you when I'm finished. I'm now getting down to the end of the fringe twisting and I want to figure out how many ends I have left. So I've put them in bunches of 6 and I found that I'm going to have 3 additional yarns left over. So I need to incorporate these 3 within the fringes that I have set out here. I don't like to put them in the last one because I think that you can see it more easily, where if it's hidden within the main body of the fringe, you don't notice it so much. So instead of having 6 yarns in each of these fringe, I'm going to make 7 in 3 of them. The first 2 I'm going to leave 6. I'm going to add, it will be 4 on one side and 3 on the other. So that will make 1 fringe. Another time I'll do 4 and 3. And then one more time I'll do 4 and 3, and that will even out those extra yarns that I had. So I finished doing these fringe, and if you look at the end here, the ones that I did thicker are these 3, and there's really very little difference between the different twists, so you really can't tell when there's one thread put in each one. Now, after you finish twisting, even though we cut this straight when we start it, there are some that as you tie, some of the yarn gets longer or shorter than the rest. So we do need to take another trimming. Also, if your knots are not exact, some are going up and down a little bit. If they're really bad, I would go back and loosen it and move the knot so it is more in line. But what you can do when you take a final trimming on this, as long as the end is straight, you really won't notice when there's a slight difference where the knot is. So getting them straight, using my rotary cutter, I'm going to go across and just cut this straight across here. And then these, even if the knots are not perfect, the end will appear to be nice and straight. You do not want to cut this too short. If you cut it right up next to that knot, as you're wet finishing it, it can pull out and the knot can come out. So try to leave yourself a little bit extra. After wet finishing, if you find that it's still a little too long here, you can always go back and trim it, but I would not do it at this point. So one more thing before we go to wet finishing, and that is labels. These labels I had designed. They are embroidered with my name, and it says designer weave at the bottom. And we take them, cut them apart. There are many companies that make labels for clothing. I liked the embroidered ones because they stand up to washing, and I think they look a little more professional. You can get them where they're also printed with your name on it. I think it's a nice touch to add to anything that you make. It shows that you're proud enough to put your name on your product. Even if you don't sell them, it's still something that makes it look just a little more professional. So I'll take it and fold these two ends in and just tack it. You can do it either way, across the bottom, or sometimes I'll put it up the side. It depends on the fabric that I've made. This one happens to blend in with the colors on this scarf really nicely. I don't like it where a tag really sticks out. When I'm wearing a scarf, I don't want to advertise whoever made it. So I like to tack it down where it is less visible. But I always put my name on the products that I weave. You can sew this on now, or you can sew it on after you've wet finished it. Doesn't matter. I usually sew it on at this point, so when I'm wet finishing, I know that I'm finished when I'm done. Thank you for joining me in this series of videos. I appreciate your watching, appreciate your comments, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I'd be happy to answer them for you. If you would, subscribe to my channel and we'll start the next project. There's a little bell next to that subscription button that will alert you anytime there's a new video up. Thanks again. I hope to see you. Bye.